Okay, I want to discuss and analyze a very important subject, which is extremism. What do we mean by extremism? What is extremism? That's not exactly a black and white question, is it? Because what one person may call an extremist, another person may say about that person or about themselves that they're merely standing up for their views. So, this is something I've given some thought to. I mean, I've leveled the term against other people, I think justifiably so, but because I've leveled that against others, it's my responsibility to be clear about what I consider it to be. So, if we interpret extremism as simply expressing anger, then almost everyone is extremist to an extent. Because whilst there are people who have an anger problem and there are people who, at least on the surface, seem to be very calm, I think most people, if they're being honest, feel very strongly about at least one issue. Even if they're not particularly political, you can be sure that they'll feel strongly about something. So if you really push someone to really be honest about something they feel strongly about, let's say, for example, they're apolitical, they don't have strong political views. Well, they might have strong views about musical tastes, something like that. So I honestly think most people do feel strongly about at least one thing. Now, some people who follow current affairs, who follow things going on in the news, are likely to feel strongly about more than one thing. And I certainly do. I feel strongly about a lot of things. I feel strongly about crime. As I think I made clear on this channel, I feel very strongly in the need for justice and holding people who terrorize society through crime to justice. I feel strongly about Islamist extremism and what I feel is the lack of a strong response to it in Western societies. I feel strongly about issues like football hooliganism. People just acting in such a stupid, Neanderthal way over a sporting event. I feel strongly about feminist hypocrisy. I feel strongly about bullying. I feel strongly about a lot of things. So I'd be a liar if I said I was the calmest person in the world, the most tranquil minded person in the world. I'm not. Sometimes I do feel very angry about particular issues. And that's why I'm grateful for this platform, often to express that anger. Although I certainly don't see it as like an anger venting machine. That's not how I see YouTube, or rather I see it as a platform to voice my views. And I'm very grateful for that. So some might say I'm an extremist because I voice anger on a lot of things. And some of my positions can't exactly be described as passive or weak. I mean, my insistence that knife thugs face jail, some might say that's extreme. I say it's not. I say it's fairness. So the point there is how people perceive things isn't always universal when it comes to how extremism is interpreted. But I do think that everyone, myself included, has a responsibility to have self control. I know there's times when I feel furious about something and I have to kind of calm down and rein myself in and think, okay, just get a grip. It's bad, but you're not going to help matters by, you know, talking about something in that way. Sometimes I need to calm myself down, certainly before I make a video, um, because otherwise it would just be a blind rant and that wouldn't help anyone. Um, So I think anger is a very natural thing. I think it's not. I don't think we should necessarily have a stigma around anger unless it's like you're yelling at someone's face. Anger is the normal thing, but I think it's healthy to have self control. I think it's healthy to kind of police ourselves, if I could put it that way. I won't say self censorship necessarily because that would be being dishonest to an extent, but let's say self regulation, whereby we voice our views in a particular way. So, where is the line from being angry, being passionate about something, and being outspoken and being controversial versus being extreme? Because I think I don't like political correctness. I think that the right to offend, or rather, being offensive, is part of free speech. So, I don't think people should constantly be ultra sensitive over whether or not their views will offend others. If it's done in a bullying sort of way, whereby, for example, they're targeting a particular individual over and over and over again, where they're trying to wear them down, that's different. That's just plain bullying. It's obnoxious. It's horrible. And it could drive someone over the edge. But if they're simply saying, I feel strongly, I don't know, that we have too many immigrants, or um, that the far right are out of control, or whatever it may be, whatever the issue is, then that's going to offend someone. If you're honest about your opinions, it's almost impossible not to offend someone. And I know full well that almost every video I make, someone will be offended by it or they'll take issue with it. I mean, clearly those trolls the other day who called me a traitor were offended by what I had to say, and that's fine. That comes with the territory. If you voice your opinion, some people won't like it, and I don't like what other people say. So that's just the way it is. But extremism, I think, is crossing a line from being angry to actually advocating harm against other people, i.e., specifically advocating violence. So the video I made about that councillor in Swale Borough Council in Kent, I consider her to be an extremist, not because I disagree with her hardline views on Brexit, but because she was actively calling for violence against people who don't see things the way she does. Now, that is extremism. If, for example, you had a Remain person say, "Oh, all these leavers are Little Englanders. We need to, censor them," I would say that's extreme because that is curtailing their right to free speech and to show frustration over Brexit. So, if your views are based on violence, if they're based on advocating violence, if they're based on shackling an entire demographic because of their opinions or because of um, who they are, i.e., their ethnic group, their religion, or whatever, that's extreme. I think criticizing ideologies is 100% legitimate, whether that be Islamism, feminism, socialism, conservatism, whatever it might be. Criticizing ideologies, I will always defend. Even if I 100% disagree with what the person is saying, I will defend the right to criticize ideology. But there's a difference between criticizing ideology and hating all people who may be associated with that ideology. So, for example, I can say I hate the double standards of feminism, and I do. But if I said I hate all feminists, that would be wrong because not all feminists think alike. I can say I hate Islamism as an ideology, but I can't say I hate all Muslims because that would be ridiculous. I've no love lost for Islamists, but they're the people who follow the ideology, so they're not representative of all Muslims. But the point I'm driving at here is that I think it's a little bit insincere to be all nicey nice and oh, let's sit down with a nice cup of tea and just discuss issues. I do think there is a place for civilized debate. I really do. And I get a bit tired of groups that call themselves discussion groups and they just descend into mudslinging and silly little mem battles. It gets tiresome. But I do think there should be, I think it's healthy to express anger and frustration. I do. Because if we didn't, it would all boil up and that would be far worse. But when people are calling for violence, I mean, let's be clear about what that councillor said. She reportedly said that Remainers are Remain voters are traitors, and gangs should attack us with machetes. I mean, what sort of mind is behind that? And if she'd said that in the heat of the moment, and maybe she'd had a few drinks, and it was an incredibly stupid thing, that might be it would still be extreme, but you could maybe overlook that. But as hot air. But the thing that's concerning about this woman is she's showing no remorse, and she presents it as being outspoken. There's being outspoken, and there's being a fanatic, and she is the latter. I contacted Swale Council over that because I think in the current environment, something like that cannot be. I mean, she's low level. She's only a councillor. She's not an MP, but still, she is an elected official, and that's when people are saying that on social media, people have responsibility for the words. So what I would say is we're going to see a lot of this in the coming months and possibly even years. We're going to see strongly worded comments from both sides of the Brexit debate. But I would appeal to leave people, for goodness sake, don't take the line this woman has taken. And I call on Remain people, don't generalize the other side. Don't call people racist. Don't, inflame tensions by making silly generalizations. Everyone ultimately is responsible for their own words. And I include myself in that. There's times, I'll be honest, I've said things that I thought, okay, maybe I should have worded that a bit differently. One thing I can honestly say is I have never, ever called for violence. I have never ever called for someone to be harassed. I have made calls for hardline action. For example, people I don't think should be in this country who don't respect our values, who don't respect human rights. I have called, for example, for those people to be kicked out of the country. I think there's too many people take Western tolerance for granted, and I think we are too tolerant with that. So I've been pretty outspoken about that. But ultimately, if we allow ourselves to go down that line of letting anger descend into something else, then we're going to hurt ourselves anyway. This is the thing. It hurts other people, but ultimately it hurts yourself because you'll either end up getting arrested, you'll end up, your reputation will be destroyed because of your antics, and you can't blame anyone but yourself. Everyone has to have a degree of self control. It's not realistic to say everyone should be calm and have a nice civilized discussion. That isn't realistic because as nice as it sounds, it just isn't realistic. People are going to have strong views on issues. Regarding politicians, because I know there's been um, there's been some reports about politicians are getting bombarded with nasty messages. My feeling about that is that if you choose to be in public life, you need to have thick skin. If you are a legislator, you're making decisions about people's lives, you have to be able to take criticism. So if MPs do get some rather unpleasant messages, I don't think they should run to the police, and most of them don't, to be fair. I think where there are threats of violence, that's different. So some idiot says this MP needs to be killed, or there's specific credible threats of violence, then I've no sympathy if that person is arrested. But if it's simply say you are, and a lot of calling the particular legislator lots of names, then that's a different matter. I mean, I've written angry messages to legislators. I've never ever made a threat, and I think it's important for people to understand that. I also think politicians, can't exactly complain about getting nasty messages if they avoid people's, if you send a letter and you go through the right channels and then it's just ignored. And I have had that experience. I've written letters which were very civil, very reasonable to MPs, and they just got ignored. And that is frustrating because, it indicates that people just aren't being listened to. And then when people feel powerless, then they do go to extremes. But ultimately, everyone's responsible for their own behavior, their own words, and their own actions. If you're in public life, you should have thick skin. You're going to be criticized, but no one should have to tolerate personal threats or threats against their family. That's definitely crossing a line. But like I say, and I'll round up with this, everyone has responsibility. That includes the media. That's why I'm so against this vile practice of doorstepping, because I feel that promotes harassment against officials. Um, and if there is another, God forbid, political assassination like we saw 3 years ago with Joe Cox, then I think I think the media will be partly to blame for their doorstepping techniques, at least. But also hate mongers like UKIP councillor. I mean, left and right, conservative and liberal, left wing, everyone has responsibility. Everyone. And if you're going to threaten people, if you're going to take your anger to another level, then I've no sympathy for what follows. But simply expressing anger, expressing dislike, or even hatred of someone, I don't think should warrant police investigation, because then it becomes abuse of police powers. I certainly don't think, for example, the police should be used to politicize something like transgender pronouns. If transgender people are getting physical threats, that's a different matter. But if someone simply disagrees that they are a woman, that, in my view, should not be a police matter. Let them argue it out, or just block the person, something like that. But don't involve the police or something like that. Let me know your thoughts.